Conflict is the essence of drama, or so they say. It's partly why in Vampire the Masquerade they refer to rules on combat, social manipulation, and having to overcome various other challenges as the game's dramatic systems. Exalted shares some roots with World of Darkness, and this common root is evidenced in the name of the 5th chapter, Systems and Conflict. I'm going to be going over the two lengthiest parts of this chapter, combat and social influence. And in case you need a reminder, the core mechanic of this game is counting up a number of d10s equal to an attribute and ability that you're using, rolling them, and counting up how many are 7 or higher, with 10s counting as 2. Combat in Exalted is intended to be more cinematic. The dice aren't meant to determine what you can do, but rather how effective what you do is. And to that end, players are encouraged to describe their attacks before they roll. While "I punch them" is enough to get your actions across to everybody, something like "I give him a flurry of weak blows to throw him off before finishing him off with a strong punch to his face" is more appropriate for an attack roll. These elaborate descriptions of attacks are referred to as stunts in Exalted, and for going that extra mile to make an attack sound more interesting than "I hit it," players are rewarded with up to 3 extra dice on the attack roll, up to the GM's discretion. If describing your attacks before knowing the result really bothers you though, just think of it like a kung fu movie or a shonen anime, where lots of blows are delivered to and from characters, yet they can keep getting up and fighting despite the wounds they should be incurring. Much like in other RPGs, when a round of combat starts, initiative is rolled. In Exalted 3rd Edition, rolling for initiative is called Joining Battle, and your dice pool for this roll is based on your wits and awareness. You count up your successes for this, and add 3. This determines your starting initiative, and after everybody rolls, the person with the highest initiative will obviously go first. When a character decides to attack in Exalted, there are 2 kinds of attacks they can make: Withering and Decisive. The roll generally remains the same, with first declaring who you're attacking and if the attack is meant to be Withering or Decisive. Regardless of this kind of attack, the first step remains the same. You roll your dice to see if you hit. This will be Dexterity, plus the relevant ability, such as Melee or Martial Arts. If the attack is Withering, you also get to add your weapon's accuracy. But weapon accuracy does not affect a Decisive attack. For this roll, you want the amount of successes you have to meet or beat the target's defense rating. Step 2 is where things get a little different depending on what kind of attack it is. We'll go over Withering Attacks first. Think of Withering Attacks as being swords clashing but never biting into the target, or punches and kicks being thrown but easily blocked. If the attack succeeds for a Withering Attack, you then determine the raw damage for that attack. This is usually how many successes you rolled, minus the target's defense, plus your strength and your weapon's damage value. The 3rd step is to subtract the target's soak from the raw damage. You then take this final number, or your weapon's overwhelming rating, and roll that many dice. And step 4 is simply the target loses 1 initiative for each success you rolled on damage, and you gain that much plus 1 to your own initiative. Decisive attacks, on the other hand, are meant to take a character out of the fight, and instead of reducing initiative, cause damage. These are swords that swing and cleave into flesh and draw blood, or unarmed strikes that break bone and cause bruises. If your decisive attack hits, you roll a number of dice equal to your initiative. Here, each 10 you receive only counts as 1 success, contrary to what the rule normally is. Then, compare your successes to the target's hardness. If you have more successes than they do hardness, you inflict that many levels of damage to the enemy. Otherwise, no damage is dealt. In either event, whether the attack dealt damage or not, you reset your initiative to 3. Should you miss when making a decisive attack though, your initiative falls by 2 if it's 10 or less, or by 3 if you have 11 or more initiative. Damage comes in 2 varieties in Exalted: damage to initiative and to your health. Damage to initiative is easily enough explained. You lose initiative as your opponent gains it from a Withering attack. However, there's some really bad things that can happen if your initiative hits 0 as a result of this. When your initiative hits 0, you enter a state called Initiative Crash. During Initiative Crash, a character's hardness is reduced to 0, regardless of any magic or equipment that grants hardness. There are a few effects that will add hardness while a character is in this state, but unless the description for that effect says otherwise, a character's hardness is still 0 in Initiative Crash. Additionally, you can't make decisive attacks, and Withering attacks made against you continue to drive your initiative further into the negatives. If a character's initiative falls so low that the GM feels they have no chance of recovery, the GM can simply declare the next Withering attack will finish them off. Also, any charms with the perilous keyword cannot be used during initiative crash. Finally, if you were put into initiative crash from your own actions, such as using a charm that lowers your initiative, you lose an additional 5 initiative. There are 2 ways to leave initiative crash. The simplest is just to survive for 3 turns in that state. After your 3rd turn, your initiative is reset to 3. The other way is to cause initiative crash on the character that caused it to you. If you do so, your initiative is reset to 3, and you may re-roll your initiative, adding the result of that roll to your reset initiative. You also get another free turn immediately afterwards, as kind of a last laugh against your enemy, though any attacks you make must be against whoever it was that crashed you. Under normal circumstances though, causing initiative crash simply grants the person who caused it an additional 5 initiative. Damage to health flow comes in 3 levels of severity: bashing, lethal, and aggravated. Bashing comes from blunt weapons and fists. This is represented with a single slash. Lethal comes from bladed and pointed weapons. This is represented with an X. Aggravated damage comes from truly heinous magical sources. This is represented with an asterisk. Combat isn't the only source of damage in this game, so just remember that bashing is pretty much what it sounds like: damage that causes bruises or other light damage. A character whose track is completely full of bashing will usually wind up unconscious. Lethal, on the other hand, is the sort of damage that causes bleeding, be it internal or external, and will leave a character dying should they take too much of it. Aggravated damage, though, is rare, and generally only powerful magic can cause it. Being completely full of aggravated damage is instant death. These kinds of damage are generally caused by decisive attacks, while withering attacks, on the other hand, just cause damage to your initiative. There's 3 things your character has to avoid damage: defense, soak, and hardness. Defense comes in 2 varieties: parrying and dodging, and your defense is whichever happens to be higher. Some magical effects will modify one or the other, and it'll specify which of those 2 it is modifying. If the effect, however, simply says it modifies defense, it modifies both. Your parry rating is your dexterity plus the ability for whatever weapon it is you're wielding, divided by 2. Parrying can't be used if you have a ranged weapon, though. Your dodge, on the other hand, is dexterity plus the dodge ability, divided by 2. This can be reduced if your character is wearing heavy armor, though. Soak is the trade-off you get to dodge penalties for wearing armor. This simply reduces the amount of initiative damage you take as a result of withering attacks, and is known as armor soak. This distinction is made since there's also natural soak. This is simply equal to your stamina. Soak only protects you from withering attacks. Hardness is generally only granted from charms and other magical effects. It only protects against damage from decisive attacks, and it only nullifies damage if the amount of damage is equal to or lower than your hardness. Additionally, hardness from multiple sources doesn't stack. You may only use the highest one that you have. Swords, slings, and strikes aren't the only source of drama in Exalted. There's also a fair amount to be said about how social influence works in this game. Much like combat or any time you'd bring out the dice in Exalted, the rolls for social influence are usually one of your social attributes plus a relevant ability. For this roll, you're trying to get more successes than the target's resolve, which is measured by wits and integrity divided by 2. Though to make things more interesting than just players shouting, "I'd roll to persuade them to do the thing," a character cannot influence one another without knowing at least one of the other character's intimacies. So how might one find out another character's intimacies? This is where actually role-playing comes along. Though if a player needs a hint for what they might do, there's always the read intentions roll they can make when dealing with somebody. The player needs to state what kind of intimacy they're trying to find out about the target, and then rolls perception and socialized against the target's guile. Guile being their manipulation and socialize divided by 2. If your roll is greater than their guile, the GM then lets the player know one of that target's intimacies that relate to what you asked about. Another reason to find out a character's intimacies is this: when you're trying to influence somebody, and their intimacies are in support of what you want them to do, you gain bonuses to that roll. However, the reverse is also true. If their intimacies are opposed to what you want them to do, they gain bonuses to their resolve. One final note about social influence is this, though. While this sort of more structured system could lend itself to using social influence on player characters, do keep in mind that some players don't like losing autonomy over their character. So if you're unsure about how your players would react to having NPCs and other players dictating how their character should act, you can safely err on the side of caution by only allowing player characters to use this on NPCs. So there you have it. Two of the biggest dramatic systems in Exalted 3rd Edition. That's not the only thing that was in that chapter, but they were the two longest sections, so I decided to give a little summary of those. So, with all that said, I am Aaron there Shadle, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, I'd really appreciate a click of that like button. If there's something else you want to see explained from Exalted or even some other game, go ahead and let me know in the comments. Just remember, videos on the internet are never a replacement for reading your rulebook.